I'm sitting in this hospital waiting room with blood still on my Hermes blouse, and all I can think about is that my 15-year-old son might have killed his father. The doctors won't tell me anything yet. Jahmir's in the other room with 2 police officers, and I don't know if I'm about to lose my baby boy to prison for saving my life. They keep asking me what happened. The truth is, it's been happening for 17 years. Tonight was just the first time someone fought back. My name is Kamari Eloise Beaumont-Sterling. On paper, I'm worth $4.2 billion. I'm the heir to the Beaumont oil fortune, 3rd generation, the kind of money that goes back to when black folks first struck oil in Texas and actually got to keep it. I went to Spelman, then Harvard Business School. I sit on 12 different boards. I've been featured in Forbes, Ebony, Essence. I have a mansion in River Oaks with 15,000 square feet, a Ferrari in the garage, and a closet full of designer clothes that could pay off someone's mortgage. And for 17 years, my husband has been beating me. The fluorescent lights in this waiting room are making my head pound, or maybe that's from where Darius hit me 6 hours ago. There's dried blood under my fingernails. My left eye is swelling shut, and I'm wearing a $2,500 blouse that's completely ruined because my son's fists sent my husband to the ICU. And I held Darius's bleeding head in my lap while I called 911. I can hear voices down the hall. One of them is Jahmir's. My baby. My firstborn. 15 years old, 6'2", a basketball prodigy with a 4.0 GPA and scholarship offers already coming in from Duke and Kentucky. He's in there right now telling police officers how he beat his father unconscious on our kitchen floor. And it's my fault. All of it. Let me take you back to 6 hours ago because that's when everything finally broke. That's when my son became someone I didn't recognize. That's when our picture-perfect life shattered into a million pieces that I don't know how to put back together. It was a Tuesday evening, 6:15 to be exact. I remember because I was watching the clock, counting down the minutes until Darius got home from the office. That's what my life had become. Counting time, calculating his moods, trying to predict which version of my husband would walk through that door. Our home in River Oaks is the kind of place people take tours to see from the outside. 15,000 square feet of Georgian architecture, manicured lawns, a circular driveway with a fountain in the center. Inside there are oil paintings worth more than most people make in a lifetime. Marble floors imported from Italy. A kitchen that was featured in Architectural Digest with custom cabinets and professional-grade appliances. That kitchen was my sanctuary. The one place in that massive house where I felt like I had some control. I was standing at the island that evening, preparing Darius's favorite meal, pan-seared salmon with asparagus and garlic mashed potatoes. Cooking was one of the few things that calmed me, one of the few activities where my hands could stay busy and my mind could pretend, just for a little while, that I was just a woman making dinner for her family. Not a billionaire trapped in her own home. Not a battered wife wearing Cartier bracelets to hide the finger-shaped bruises on my wrists. Jahmir was sitting at the kitchen table doing his calculus homework. My boy, my beautiful boy, with his father's height and my eyes and a mind sharper than both of us combined. He had his earbuds in, but I knew he wasn't really listening to music. He was listening for the sound of his father's car in the driveway. We all were. Even Zane upstairs playing video games in his room. My 12-year-old baby who'd learned to disappear into virtual worlds because the real world in our house was too frightening. The front door opened at 6:43. I felt it before I heard it. That shift in the air, that tension that settles into your bones when you've lived with violence long enough. Darius's footsteps in the foyer. Heavy. Deliberate. The clink of his keys hitting the marble console table harder than necessary. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, and I knew immediately it was going to be a bad night. You learn to read the signs. The set of his jaw. The way his shoulders were tight. The fact that he went straight to the bar cart and poured himself 3 fingers of Pappy Van Winkle bourbon, the 23-year $800 a bottle, and downed it in 2 gulps. Darius Kenyatta Sterling. 47 years old. 6'4", still built like the college football star he used to be before his knee gave out junior year and ended his NFL dreams. Handsome in that way that makes strangers trust him immediately. Warm brown eyes, a smile that could charm anyone, a voice smooth as aged whiskey. In public, he was the devoted husband, the doting father, the man who'd married into oil money but still volunteered at youth football camps and donated to HBCUs and gave speeches about black excellence and family values. Behind closed doors, he was my nightmare. "Rough day?" asked, keeping my voice light, neutral. That was the game. Don't poke the bear, don't show fear, pretend everything's normal until it's not. He poured another bourbon. "The Chevron deal fell through. Marcus called it off. Said he's going with another company." His voice was flat, controlled, but I could hear the rage underneath. Marcus was his college teammate, now a CEO, and the deal would have been Darius's first major solo contract. His chance to prove he'd earned his place at Beaumont Oil, that he wasn't just the man who'd married the boss's daughter. "I'm sorry, baby. There'll be other deals." I turned back to the stove, plating the salmon, making sure everything looked perfect. Perfect food, perfect wife, maybe tonight could be a perfect evening. "Other deals." He laughed, bitter. "Easy for you to say. You were born into this. You don't know what it's like to actually have to work for it." Jahmir's head came up from his textbook. I saw him pull out one earbud. My heart started racing. "Darius, you work hard. Everyone knows that." I set his plate down at the head of the table. "Come eat. I made your favorite." He walked over, looked down at the food I'd spent an hour preparing, picked up his fork, cut into the salmon, took a bite, and I watched his expression change into something cold and cruel. "It's cold." "It's not cold, baby. I just took it off the—" "Don't tell me what it is, Kamari. I'm eating it. It's cold." He took another bite, his jaw working. "And you over-seasoned it. How many times have I told you I don't like it when you put too much garlic in the potatoes?" My hands were shaking. I clasped them together, that practiced gesture of submission I'd perfected over the years. "I'm sorry. I can make you something else. It'll just take—" "I don't want something else." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I want my wife to know how to cook a simple meal without ruining it. I want to come home after getting humiliated in a business meeting and not have to deal with incompetence in my own house." Jahmir stood up too. "Dad, the food's fine. I'm eating the same thing and it's good." "Sit down, Jahmir. This doesn't concern you." "It does if you're going to talk to Mom like that." The air in that kitchen got so thick I could barely breathe. Darius turned slowly to look at our son, and I saw something flash in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that Jahmir had spoken up. Or anger that someone had dared to challenge him. "What did you just say to me?" I stepped between them. "Jahmir, it's okay. Go check on your brother upstairs." "No." My 15-year-old son looked at me, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Determination. Resolve. "I'm not leaving." Darius smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're not leaving. You think you're a man now. You think you get a say in what happens in my house." "It's not your house," Jahmir said quietly. "It's Mom's house. It's her family's house. You just live here." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I saw Darius's hand curl into a fist, saw the muscle in his jaw jump, saw 17 years of resentment and rage and wounded pride crystallize into something dangerous. "Jahmir, please," I whispered. "Go upstairs. Please." But my son didn't move. He just stood there, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, staring at his father like he was daring him to do something. And I realized in that moment that Jahmir wasn't the little boy who used to cry in his room anymore. He'd been watching. He'd been growing. He'd been getting stronger. And he'd been waiting. Darius's phone rang, shattering the tension. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, ignored the call. It rang again immediately. This time he answered. "What?" His voice was sharp, annoyed. Then his expression changed. "Tonight. I told you I needed until Friday." He walked out of the kitchen, his voice fading as he headed toward his study. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Turned to Jahmir, who was still standing there, his hands clenched at his sides. Baby, you can't do that. You can't challenge him like that. Why not? His voice cracked, somewhere between a boy and a man. Why do we just let him treat you like this? Why do we pretend it's normal? Because I didn't have an answer. Or I had too many answers. Because I'm scared. Because my mother says marriage requires sacrifice. Because leaving would mean admitting failure. Because he's threatened to take you boys away from me. Because I don't know how to be anything other than what I've been for 17 years. If you're still watching this, please hit that subscribe button. This story gets darker before it gets better. And I need you to stay with me to understand how we got here. Because what, Mom? Jahmir pressed. Because he's Dad. Because we have money. Because people would talk. He shook his head. I'm 15 years old, and even I know that's not a good enough reason. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my lawyer's office. A reminder about updating my will. Standard procedure, something I did every few years to ensure the business succession was clear. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Darius walked back into the kitchen, his face dark. He'd seen my phone screen. I watched his eyes narrow as he read the message preview. Updating your will. His voice was too quiet, too controlled. That was always worse than the yelling. It's routine, Darius. I do it every routine. He walked toward me slowly, deliberately. You're updating your will. After I just lost the biggest deal of my career. After I've spent 17 years building up your family's company. After everything I've sacrificed to be here. This has nothing to do with you trying to cut me out, Kamari. He was close now, too close. I could smell the bourbon on his breath. That's what this is about. You think you can just push me aside. After I gave up football for you. After I gave up everything. Jahmir moved toward us. Dad, step back. I'm talking to my wife. You're scaring her. I'm scaring her. Darius laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Your mother owns half of Texas. She's scared of nothing. Isn't that right, Kamari? You're the Beaumont heir. You've got all the power. You've got all the money. So why do you look so scared right now? His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to leave a mark. He'd learned over the years how to hurt me without visible evidence. Just tight enough to let me know he could. That familiar grip, the one that meant we'd crossed a line and there was no going back until he decided we were done. I didn't flinch. I'd learned not to. Flinching made it worse. But Jahmir flinched. I saw him take a step forward, saw his whole body go rigid, saw his hands ball into fists at his sides. And the look on his face. God, the look on his face. It was rage and fear and helplessness all mixed together. The same expression I'd seen on him when he was 5 years old and too small to do anything but watch. Except now he wasn't small anymore. Let her go. Jahmir's voice was shaking. Or what? Darius's grip tightened on my wrist. You going to stop me, son? You think you're big enough now? Jahmir, it's fine, I said quickly, desperately. We're just talking. Everything's fine. But it wasn't fine. It had never been fine. And my son knew it. He'd known it his entire life. What would you do if you were Jahmir in that moment? If you'd watched your mother get hurt for 15 years and suddenly you were big enough to do something about it? Let me know in the comments, because what happened next changed all of our lives forever. Darius released my wrist and turned toward our son. You want to be the man of the house, Jahmir? You want to protect your mother? He took a step toward him. Then you better be ready for what that means. Because being a man in this family means knowing when to stay in your lane. I saw Zayn then, standing at the bottom of the stairs. My 12-year-old baby, his controller still in his hand. His eyes wide and terrified. He'd heard the yelling. He'd come down to see. And now he was frozen there, watching another scene he'd witnessed too many times before. Zayn, go back upstairs, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. But he didn't move. He just stood there, and I saw tears starting to roll down his cheeks. That's when Darius snapped. Maybe it was seeing Zayn cry. Maybe it was the bourbon. Maybe it was 17 years of resentment finally boiling over. Maybe it was just Tuesday. With Darius, the reason never really mattered. He turned back to me, and I saw the shift in his eyes. The moment when my husband disappeared and the monster took over. You know what your problem is, Kamari. You think that money makes you better than me. You think that because you inherited some oil wells and a fancy last name that you can look down on me. But let me tell you something. He grabbed my arm, yanked me toward him. Without me, you'd just be another spoiled rich girl who doesn't know the first thing about the real world. I made you into something. Gave you these boys. I built up your company's profile. And this is how you repay me. By trying to cut me out of your will. I'm not trying to cut you out. Don't lie to me. His voice exploded, echoing off the marble and custom cabinets. I've given you everything, and you're planning your exit strategy. Well, let me make something clear to you, sweetheart. You're not going anywhere. You're not leaving me. 'Cause if you try, I will destroy you. I will take these boys, and I will make sure everyone knows what kind of mother you really are. Unstable. Paranoid. Unfit. His hand moved from my arm to my hair. He twisted it, pulling my head back, and the pain was sharp and familiar. I'd learned over the years not to cry out, because that only made him angrier. I'd learned to go quiet, to go still, to wait for it to be over. But this time was different. Because this time Jahmir didn't just watch. Get your hands off her. My son's voice was something I'd never heard before. Primal. Full of 15 years of pent-up rage and helpless fury finally finding a release. Darius let go of my hair and turned toward Jahmir, and I saw him smile. Smile. Like he was glad this was finally happening. Like he'd been waiting for this confrontation as long as Jahmir had. You want to do something about it, son? You think you're ready? Darius don't. I stepped between them, but he pushed me aside. Not hard, but firmly enough that I stumbled into the kitchen island. Stay out of this, Kamari. This is between me and the boy. But Jahmir wasn't a boy anymore. Not in that moment. In that moment, he was 6'2" and 185 pounds of lean muscle and basketball training and 17 years of watching his father hurt his mother. In that moment he was every bit as big as his father. Maybe bigger because he had something Darius didn't have anymore. He had everything to lose. I'm done watching, Jahmir said, and his voice was steady now, cold. I'm done pretending I don't see what you do to her. I'm done being too small to stop you. Jahmir, please, I begged. Go upstairs with your brother. Please, baby. But he didn't even look at me. He was staring at his father and Darius was staring back, and I knew that something terrible was about to happen. Darius moved first. He grabbed me by my blouse, those designer silk buttons popping as he yanked me toward the back hall that led to the kitchen. Away from the boys. Like he'd done 100 times before. Private violence always kept private. We're going to have a conversation, he said, his voice deadly calm. And you're going to explain to me exactly what you meant by updating your will. And then you're going to call that lawyer and tell him you've changed your mind. I saw Jahmir start to follow us, saw the determination on his face, saw him transformed from my studious, gentle son into something fierce and protective and dangerous. Jahmir, no. But my words were cut off as Darius's fist connected with my face. I heard Zayn scream, heard my own gasp of pain, tasted blood in my mouth, felt my legs give out as I hit the marble floor, my vision going dark at the edges. And then I heard my 15-year-old son roar like an animal, and everything went to hell. But I'll tell you what happened next after I explain how we got here in the first place. Because you need to understand, this wasn't just one night of violence. This was 17 years of systematic abuse. This was a love story that turned into a nightmare. This was how a strong, educated, wealthy woman got trapped in a cage of her own making. And it all started the night I met Darius Sterling at a charity gala in Atlanta, when I was 24 years old and stupid enough to believe that love could conquer anything. I need to take you back. Back before that kitchen floor covered in blood. Back before my son's fists turned him into someone I didn't recognize. Back to when I was 24 years old and thought I knew everything about love and nothing about survival. It was May 2006. I just finished my MBA at Harvard Business School, top of my class, ready to take my place in the family empire. Beaumont Oil had been in our family for 3 generations, founded by my great-grandfather Thaddeus Beaumont in 1947, when black folks were finally starting to get a piece of the oil boom in Texas. By the time I was born, we were worth billions with a capital B. My mother, Lorraine Beaumont, ran the company with an iron fist after my father died when I was 12. She was grooming me to take over, had been my whole life. That spring, I was back in Atlanta for the annual HBCU Scholarship Gala at the Ritz-Carlton in Buckhead. $3,000 a plate, every influential black family in the South in attendance, the kind of event where marriages were arranged and business deals were sealed over champagne and crab cakes. I wore a gold Versace gown that cost more than a car, my mother's diamond choker around my neck, my hair pressed straight and falling down my back. I looked the part, the Beaumont heir, educated, elegant, untouchable. I was also desperately lonely. That's something nobody tells you about growing up with that kind of money. You can have everything and still feel empty. I'd spent 4 years at Spelman surrounded by brilliant black women, then 2 years at Harvard surrounded by brilliant sharks who smiled at me while calculating how to use my family name for their own gain. I'd learned to read balance sheets and negotiate contracts and speak 3 languages, but I'd never learned how to just be a regular 24-year-old woman who wanted someone to see her, really see her, not just the dollar signs attached to her last name. Then I met Darius. He walked into that ballroom like he owned it. 6'4", shoulders that could carry the world, wearing a Tom Ford tuxedo like he was born in it. But it wasn't his looks that caught my attention. Atlanta was full of handsome men. It was the way he moved. Confident but not arrogant. Comfortable in his own skin in a room full of people performing for each other. He was there as a guest speaker, the rising star running back from Georgia Tech who everyone said was going to be a first-round draft pick. The hometown hero who'd grown up in Mechanicsville, a neighborhood that had seen better days, and made something of himself through football and sheer determination. Our eyes met across that crowded room, and I swear to God, it was like something out of a movie. He smiled at me, this slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Oh, possibility. The chance to be wanted for who I was, not what I had. He approached me during the silent auction, pretended to be interested in a weekend package at Sea Island that he probably couldn't afford at the time. "You thinking about bidding on this?" he asked. His voice smooth and warm like honey and tea. "Maybe," I said, playing coy. "Are you? On my salary?" "Not likely." He laughed, easy and self-deprecating. But I figured it was a good excuse to come talk to the most beautiful woman in this room. I'd heard pickup lines before. Rich men, entitled men, men who thought my money made me either a prize to be won or a bank account to be accessed. But something about the way Darius said it felt different. Genuine. Like he was nervous, even though he was this big football star and I was just a girl in a pretty dress. We talked for 3 hours that night. About everything and nothing. He told me about growing up with a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep him fed and in school. About how football saved him, gave him purpose, got him out of a neighborhood where too many of his friends ended up dead or in prison. About his dreams of playing in the NFL and using that platform to give back to his community. I told him about the pressure of carrying a family legacy, about feeling like I was more of a symbol than a person, about wanting to prove I deserved my position through merit, not just birth. He didn't ask about my money. Not once. He asked about my favorite books, my dreams, what made me laugh. By the end of the night I was hooked. My mother loved him immediately. Lorraine Beaumont, who'd never approved of anyone I'd dated, took one look at Darius and saw exactly what she wanted for her daughter. "Finally," she said after meeting him the second time, "a strong man who can protect you in this business. Someone who understands hard work. Someone who won't be intimidated by our family." Looking back, I should have questioned that. Should have wondered why my mother, who'd built an empire by trusting no one, was so quick to embrace this man she barely knew. But I was 24 and in love for the first time in my life, and I wanted her approval so badly I couldn't see the red flags waving right in front of my face. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Darius was everything I'd ever wanted. Attentive without being clingy. Protective without being possessive. He'd show up at my apartment in Midtown with takeout from Busy Bee Cafe when I was working late on business proposals. He'd send me flowers for no reason. Not expensive roses, but wildflowers from the farmer's market because he remembered I'd mentioned once that I preferred them. He made me feel safe in a way I'd never felt before, like the world couldn't touch me as long as he was there. 6 months after we met, he proposed. We were on Martha's Vineyard for Labor Day weekend at the Beaumont family compound, this sprawling estate on the water that my great-grandfather had bought in the 50s when black folks weren't supposed to own property there. Darius took me down to the beach at sunset, got down on one knee in the sand, and pulled out a ring he'd saved 6 months of his NFL signing bonus to buy. It wasn't the biggest diamond I'd ever seen. My mother's rings could have fed a small country, but it was the most meaningful. Kamari Eloise Beaumont, he said, and I remember his hands were shaking. You're the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I've ever met. You make me want to be better. You make me believe I can be more than just a kid from Mechanicsville who got lucky with a football. I promise to protect you, to honor you, to build a life with you that's about more than money or status or what anybody else thinks. I promise to love you exactly as you are. Will you marry me? I said yes before he even finished the question. I was crying, he was crying, and I thought this was it. This was my fairy tale. My mother's empire and my own love story. The perfect combination of duty and desire. We got married 8 months later at the Beaumont estate outside of Houston. 300 guests, Vera Wang dress. Beyoncé performing at the reception because my mother knew her people. The society pages called it the wedding of the decade. Black royalty meets NFL royalty. Old money meets new potential. The Beaumont's oil fortune securing its future through my brilliant match. Darius looked at me during our first dance like I was the only person in the world. He whispered in my ear, "I'm going to spend every day of my life making you happy, Kamari. I swear it." And for 2 years he kept that promise. We were happy. Really genuinely happy. He was drafted by the Houston Texans in the second round. Good enough to make the team but not so high that the pressure was crushing. I started working my way up at Beaumont Oil, proving I could handle the responsibility. We bought a house in River Oaks, started talking about babies, built a life that looked perfect from every angle. Then his knee exploded during a preseason game in his 3rd year. I was at that game. Front row seat, wearing his jersey, screaming myself hoarse every time he touched the ball. The play wasn't even that remarkable. A routine handoff, a hole in the line, Darius cutting left to avoid a tackle. Then I heard the pop. Not from where I was sitting, but I swear I heard it anyway, felt it in my bones. Watched my husband go down and not get back up. Watched the medical team swarm him. Watched them cart him off the field while the crowd went silent. 3 torn ligaments. Shattered kneecap. Career over at 28 years old. The depression hit him like a freight train. This man who'd been so confident, so sure of his purpose, suddenly had nothing. Football had been his identity since he was 8 years old. It was how he'd escaped poverty, how he'd made a name for himself, how he'd proven his worth to the world. And in 1 second, one unlucky cut, it was gone. I tried to help. God, I tried. I suggested therapy, support groups, even just talking to other retired players who'd been through the same thing. I reminded him that he had options. Coaching, broadcasting, working at Beaumont Oil in a real capacity. Not just the token VP title my mother had given him as a wedding gift. I told him I loved him, that his worth wasn't tied to football, that we could figure this out together. He spiraled anyway. Started drinking more. Stopped going to physical therapy. Spent days on the couch watching game film from his college days, torturing himself with what used to be. The pain medication the doctors prescribed turned into something he needed just to get through the day. I was 3 months pregnant with Jahmir when it happened the first time. It was a Tuesday night 9 months after his injury. I was exhausted from morning sickness that lasted all day, trying to keep down crackers and ginger ale. Darius had been drinking since noon. His fourth or fifth bourbon, I'd lost count. I found him in his study staring at his computer screen, looking at job postings for coaching positions he wasn't qualified for, teams that hadn't called him back. "Baby," I said gently, "maybe you should talk to someone. There's no shame in getting help. This is a major life transition, Anne. A major life transition." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were different. "Cold. Is that what they taught you to call it at Harvard? When a man loses everything that matters, that's just a major life transition." "That's not what I meant. I just think. You think I need a therapist. You think I need some stranger to tell me how to feel about my life being over. Your life isn't over, Darius. You have so much. I have nothing." He stood up so fast his chair fell over. "I have nothing that's mine. I live in your house. I work at your company in a position everybody knows I didn't earn. I'm about to be a father to a baby who'll have your last name before mine because that's what your mother insisted on. I'm 28 years old, and I'm already irrelevant." My heart broke for him. I could see his pain, understand his frustration, feel his loss almost as deeply as my own. I walked toward him, reached out to touch his arm, to offer comfort the way I'd done 1,000 times before. "Darius, you're not irrelevant. You're my husband. You're about to be a father. Those things matter more than." His hand moved so fast I didn't see it coming. The slap across my face was loud in the quiet study, shocking in its suddenness. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my cheek, my pregnant belly thrown off balance. For a moment we both just stood there frozen. Him staring at his hand like it belonged to someone else. Me staring at him like I was seeing a stranger. "Kamari," his voice broke. "Oh God, Kamari, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I didn't mean." He fell to his knees in front of me, wrapped his arms around my legs, started sobbing into my dress. Real, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. It's the pain pills, the alcohol, I'm not thinking straight. I would never hurt you. You know I would never hurt you. Please, Kamari, please forgive me. I'll get help. I'll stop drinking. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't leave me. You're all I have left." And I forgave him. Right there in that moment, with my cheeks still stinging and my baby moving in my belly, I forgave him. Because I believed it was the injury, the medication, the depression. Because the man crying at my feet looked broken and lost and nothing like the confident, charming man who'd proposed to me on a beach. Because I loved him and love meant giving second chances. Because I was 26 years old and pregnant and terrified. And I didn't know that first slap was just the beginning of a nightmare that would last 17 years. The flowers arrived the next day. 24 white roses, my favorites, with a card that said, "I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. You are my everything. I love you more than life itself." He stopped drinking for 3 months. Went to physical therapy religiously. Started seeing a therapist twice a week. Applied for coaching positions with real enthusiasm. He was the old Darius again, attentive and loving and everything I'd fallen in love with. By the time Jahmir was born, I'd almost convinced myself it had been a one-time mistake, a moment of weakness that would never happen again. Our son came into the world on a cold January morning, 8 pounds and 3 ounces of perfect screaming life. Kamari Sterling. We named him Jahmir because it meant handsome in Swahili, and Amari after my father who died when I was 12. Darius held him in the hospital and cried tears of joy, promised our son he'd be the best father in the world, that he'd protect him and guide him and never let him down. I wish I could say that Jahmir's birth changed everything. That becoming a father gave Darius a new purpose, healed whatever was broken inside him, brought back the man I'd married. And for a while it seemed like maybe it had. He was devoted to our son, gentle and patient in ways that made my heart ache with relief. But the violence didn't stop, just became routine. A month after we brought Jahmir home, Darius pushed me during an argument about whose turn it was to do the 2 a.m. feeding. I hit the nursery wall, hard enough to leave a bruise on my shoulder blade. He apologized, brought flowers, was extra sweet for a week. 3 months later, he slapped me because I'd forgotten to pick up his prescription. More apologies, more flowers, more promises to do better. By Jahmir's first birthday, the pattern was established. Darius would get angry over something small, burned dinner, a perceived slight, a business setback, and he'd lash out. Sometimes it was just words, cutting and cruel. Sometimes it was physical, pushing, grabbing, slapping. And then would come the apology phase. The tears, the flowers, the promises, the period of peace where I could almost believe it was over. The worst part was watching it happen in front of our son. Jahmir was too young to understand what he was seeing, but I knew it was affecting him. I could see it in the way he'd startle at loud noises, the way he'd cry when Darius and I argued even if there was no violence. I was raising my baby boy in a war zone disguised as a mansion. Darius's resentment grew like a cancer. He was living in my family's house, working at my family's company in a position everyone knew he hadn't earned, driving cars my trust fund had paid for. Every day reminded him that he'd lost his identity as a football player and become Kamari Beaumont's husband instead. The man who'd married into oil money. The former athlete living off his wife's wealth. My mother gave him a vice president title at Beaumont Oil with a corner office and a secretary and a salary that would have been impressive if it weren't a fraction of my own compensation. He went to the office every day and accomplished very little, mostly because the real executives wouldn't listen to him. They knew he was there as a courtesy, and so did he. The abuse escalated with his shame. Pushing turned into slapping. Slapping turned into punches. By the time Jahmir turned 3, I was hiding bruises with makeup and long sleeves, inventing excuses for why I'd walked into a door or fallen down the stairs. My mother's friends would give me sympathetic looks at charity events, but nobody asked questions. Nobody wanted to know. When I finally worked up the courage to confide in my mother, to show her the bruises on my ribs where Darius had kicked me during an argument about his job performance, she closed her eyes and sighed like I'd disappointed her. "Marriage takes work, dear," she said in that cool, controlled voice she used when discussing business matters. "Your grandmother stayed through worse. My own marriage had its difficulties. This is what commitment means. Mama, he's hitting me. This isn't normal marital problems, this is private," she cut me off sharply. "And it will stay private. The Beaumont name cannot be associated with scandal. Do you understand what would happen if this got out? The board would question your stability. Our competitors would use it against us. Your father and I built this empire on discretion and dignity. You will maintain both. But Jahmir is seeing it. Our son is growing up watching his father hurt his mother. Then you'll be more careful about when and where you argue with your husband. Children are resilient, Kamari. They survive far worse than witnessing their parents having disagreements. Disagreements. She called it disagreements like Darius and I were debating where to go for dinner. Not like he was beating me in our marital bed while our toddler slept down the hall. I learned that day that I was truly alone. If my own mother wouldn't help me, who would? Who could I trust with this terrible secret that would destroy the perfect image of the Beaumont-Sterling family? Jahmir was 5 years old the first time he tried to protect me. We were in the living room. Darius had come home angry about a board meeting where my mother had overruled one of his suggestions. He'd been drinking, and I'd made the mistake of asking if he wanted dinner. He shoved me into the wall, hard enough that I knocked over a very expensive vase that shattered on the marble floor. Jahmir came running from the playroom where he'd been watching cartoons. My beautiful baby boy with his father's height genes already showing, skinny and all limbs but brave in a way that terrified me. "Stop," he shouted, his little voice high and scared. "Stop hurting Mommy." He tried to push himself between us, his small hands pushing against his father's legs. Darius looked down at him like he was noticing him for the first time, and something shifted in his expression. Shame maybe. Or anger that someone had witnessed his moment of weakness. "Go to your room, Jahmir," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "No. Leave Mommy alone." Darius grabbed our son by the arm and hauled him toward the stairs. Not roughly. He never hurt the boys, that was a line he wouldn't cross, but firmly enough that Jahmir's feet barely touched the ground. "Men don't interfere in grown folks' business," Darius said as he deposited Jahmir at the bottom of the stairs. "What happens between your mother and me is between us. You understand? When you're a man, you'll understand that sometimes women need to be corrected. But that's not your job. Your job is to go to your room and stay there." Jahmir looked back at me, his eyes huge and filled with tears, his little face twisted with confusion and fear and helplessness. I forced a smile, tried to make my voice normal. "It's okay, baby. Mummy's fine. Go watch your cartoons." But I wasn't fine, and he knew it. Even at 5 years old, my son knew his mother was lying to protect him from a truth he was already living with every day. I watched something die in Jahmir's eyes that day. Some innocence. Some belief that parents were safe and homes were sanctuaries and daddies protected mommies instead of hurting them. From that day on he was different. Quieter. More watchful. He stopped being a carefree little boy and started being a small soldier on constant alert. The years blurred together after that. Zayn was born when Jahmir was 3, another beautiful boy to love and worry about, and tried desperately to shield from his father's rage. The abuse continued in its cycle. Violence, apology, peace, violence again. Darius got better at hiding it from the boys, waiting until they were asleep or at school. But they knew. Course they knew. You can't hide that kind of toxicity from children who live in it. Jahmir threw himself into school and basketball with an intensity that wasn't natural for a child. Straight A's from kindergarten on. Made every basketball team he tried out for. Excelled at everything he touched like he was trying to be so perfect that somehow his perfection would fix our broken family. At night, I'd hear him crying through his bedroom wall. These quiet, muffled sobs that broke my heart into smaller and smaller pieces. I tried to leave once. Jahmir was 7, Zayn was 4. Darius had broken my collarbone during an argument about hiring a new executive without his input. I told him I was taking the boys to visit my aunt in Dallas for a few days. Instead, I was planning to file for divorce, hire security, get restraining orders. He found out. I still don't know how. Maybe he'd been tracking my phone, maybe he'd overheard a call with my lawyer. But he found out, and the night before I was supposed to leave, he sat me down in our bedroom and laid out exactly what would happen if I tried. "Leave me," he said calmly, like we were discussing stock prices, "and I will take those boys from you. I'll tell every judge in Texas that you're unstable, paranoid, that your mother's pressure to run the company has made you mentally ill, that you're an unfit mother who puts business before her children. I'll bring up every time you've worked late, every business trip you've taken, every nanny we've hired because you were too busy building an empire to raise your own sons. That's not true. You know that's not true. Doesn't matter what's true, Kamari. Matters what I can make people believe. And who are they going to believe? A loving father who gave up his NFL career to support his wife's business ambitions, or a billionaire ice queen who can't even keep her family together? I'll get custody. I'll get the house. I'll get half of everything you have. And you'll get visitation every other weekend if you're lucky." He leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. "Plus, think about what it'll do to your precious company. The board questioning your judgment. Your mother disappointed in you. The press having a field day with the Beaumont heirs' failed marriage. Your father's legacy tarnished because his daughter couldn't hold her family together." "You're bluffing," I whispered, but I knew he wasn't. "Try me. Walk out that door tomorrow, and I'll destroy you. Everything you've worked for, everything you love, I will systematically dismantle until you have nothing left but money. And money didn't make you happy before you met me, did it?" He was right. That was the most terrifying part. He was absolutely right. The courts favored fathers more than people realized, especially wealthy, charming fathers with good lawyers and sympathetic stories about demanding wives. The scandal would devastate the company my great-grandfather had built. My mother would never forgive me. And I'd lose my boys, at least partially, to a man who'd proven over and over that his love came with violence attached. So I stayed. I unpacked the suitcases I'd hidden in the garage. I called my lawyer and told him I'd changed my mind. I went back to my gilded prison and tried to convince myself it was for the boys, for the business, for all the logical reasons that sounded so much better than the truth. The truth was I was terrified, not just of Darius, but of losing everything that made me who I was. I was Kamari Eloise Beaumont-Sterling, fourth-generation oil heiress, MBA from Harvard, member of 12 boards, featured in Forbes and Essence and Black Enterprise. I was somebody, and being somebody in a bad marriage felt better than being nobody on my own. That's what abuse does to you. It doesn't just hurt your body. It rewires your brain until you can't imagine surviving without your abuser. Until you've convinced yourself that staying is strength and leaving is weakness. Until you've built a fortress of justifications so high you can't see over the walls anymore. The boys grew up in that fortress with me. Jahmir got taller, smarter, more successful, and more hollow behind the eyes. Zayn became quieter, more withdrawn, disappearing into video games and books where imaginary worlds were safer than his real one. I became an expert at hiding bruises, explaining away injuries, maintaining the perfect facade of the Beaumont-Sterling family for society pages and charity galas and business dinners. 3 years ago, Darius put me in the hospital. We'd been arguing about his job performance again. He'd made a disastrous decision on an acquisition without consulting the board, and it had cost the company $30 million. I tried to talk to him calmly about it, explain that he needed to work with the team instead of against them. He'd responded by punching me in the ribs hard enough to crack 3 of them. The official story was that I'd fallen down the stairs. Clumsy Kamari, always in too much of a hurry, not watching where she was going. The staff knew better. The security guards who found me knew better. But nobody said anything because that's what you do in houses like ours. You keep the secrets, you protect the family name, you look the other way. Except for Amara. Amara Nichelle Washington had been my best friend since we were both 9 years old at Jack and Jill summer camp. She'd gone to med school at Johns Hopkins, become an ER doctor, married and divorced young, and stayed in Houston where she could be close to her aging parents. She was one of the few people in my life who knew me before the money defined me, who remembered when I was just Kamari with big dreams and bigger insecurities. She was the one who treated me in the ER that night. One look at my injuries, at the defensive bruising on my arms, at the pattern of the breaks in my ribs, and she knew exactly what had happened. This is the 4th time you've been in my ER in 10 years with injuries that don't match your explanations, she said after she'd sent the nurses away and closed the door to give us privacy. Don't insult my intelligence or my love for you by telling me you fell down the stairs again. I looked at her, at my oldest friend with tears streaming down her face, and I broke. I told her everything. 17 years of violence, 17 years of apologies and promises and cycles that never ended. 17 years of being trapped by money and fear and the weight of a legacy I couldn't escape. Leave him, Amara begged, holding my hand while tears ran down both our faces. Please, Kamari. Take the boys and leave. I'll help you. We'll testify. I'll give you every medical record I've kept from every time you've come in here. We'll get you protection, lawyers, whatever you need. I can't, I whispered. He'll take them from me. He'll destroy everything. My mother will never forgive me. The company will suffer. I can't, Amara. You mean you won't? Her voice was harsh, not with judgment but with fear. You won't because you're more afraid of losing your lifestyle than you are of losing your life. That's not fair. Fair. You want to talk about fair. She gestured at my broken body on that hospital bed. What's fair about your sons growing up watching their father beat their mother? What's fair about Jahmir, that brilliant, sensitive boy, learning that this is what love looks like? What's fair about little Zayn being so traumatized that he barely speaks anymore? I'm protecting them. You're teaching them, she cut me off. You're teaching Jahmir that real men hurt the women they claim to love. You're teaching Zayn that it's normal to live in fear. You're teaching both of them that money and status matter more than safety and dignity. Is that really the lesson you want them to learn? Her words hit me like physical blows because they were true. I knew they were true. But knowing and being able to act on that knowledge were 2 different things. One day, Kamari, Amara said, her voice breaking. He's going to kill you. Or worse, your boys will see it happen. They'll watch their father murder their mother, and they'll spend the rest of their lives carrying that trauma. Is that what you want? Because that's where this is heading. Abuse always escalates. Always. And you're running out of time. I promised her I'd think about it. Promised I'd make a plan. Promised a lot of things I had no intention of following through on because I was too scared, too trapped, too convinced that the devil I knew was better than the unknown I'd face if I left. But Amara was right about one thing. Abuse does escalate. And we were running out of time. Jahmir turned 13, then 14, then 15. He got bigger, stronger, his voice deepening, his shoulders broadening. He made varsity basketball as a freshman, got straight A's without trying, had college scouts already sniffing around. On the outside he was every parent's dream, the perfect son, the model student athlete, the boy who was going to make something of himself. But I watched the hardness growing in his eyes. The way his jaw would clench when Darius raised his voice at me. The way his hands would curl into fists under the dinner table when his father made one of his cutting remarks. The way he'd stare at Darius sometimes with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it fear? Hatred? Anticipation? I think part of me knew what was coming. Knew that eventually, my son would be big enough and angry enough and fed up enough to do something about the violence he'd witnessed his entire life. I just didn't know when. Didn't know how. Didn't know it would happen on a random Tuesday evening over dinner and a text message about updating my will. Have you ever stayed in a situation you knew was destroying you because leaving felt impossible? Have you ever watched someone you love suffer and felt powerless to stop it? Drop a comment and let me know because I need you to understand. This isn't a story about weakness. This is a story about how abuse traps you, how money doesn't buy freedom, how love can turn into something unrecognizable without you even noticing until it's too late. If you're still here with me, if you're invested in finding out what happened when Jahmir finally snapped and how we're all dealing with the aftermath, please hit that subscribe button. Because what comes next, the violence, the consequences, the reckoning, that's when this story really begins. That's when everything I'd built over 17 years came crashing down in one terrible, bloody, irreversible moment. And I still don't know if my son saved my life or destroyed his own. Now let me take you back to that evening. Back to 6:43 p.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other day and ended with my son's hands covered in his father's blood. I was standing at that kitchen island, my hands trembling as I plated Darius's salmon, when his car pulled into the driveway. That sound, gravel crunching under expensive tires, used to make me smile. Now it made my stomach drop. You learn to read the signs. The speed he's driving. How hard he closes the car door. The heaviness of his footsteps. After 17 years, I could predict his mood from the sound of his approach. That night, everything about his arrival screamed danger. The front door slammed. His keys hit the marble console table in the foyer with a crash that made me flinch. Jahmir's head came up from his calculus homework, and I saw him pull out one earbud. His body going rigid the way it always did when his father came home angry. My baby boy, 15 years old but already carrying the weight of a grown man's fear. Darius appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:43 exactly. I remember because I glanced at the clock, calculating how long until the boy's bedtime. How long until I could retreat to my own bedroom and lock the door and pretend I was safe for a few hours. He downed it in 2 gulps and poured another. Rough day. I kept my voice light, neutral, the same tone I'd used to discuss the weather. Don't poke the bear. Don't show fear. Act normal until the situation resolves itself one way or another. The Chevron deal fell through. His voice was flat, emotionless, which was somehow worse than if he'd been yelling. Marcus called it off this afternoon. Said he's going with Wellington Energy instead. Marcus Thompson, Darius's former teammate at Georgia Tech, now the CEO of a major distribution company. The deal had been in the works for 6 months, would have been worth $40 million to Beaumont Oil, and more importantly, it would have been Darius's deal. His first major solo contract. His chance to prove to everyone, to himself, that he belonged at that company through merit, not just marriage. I'm sorry, baby, I said, and I meant it. I knew how much he'd been counting on this. There'll be other opportunities. Marcus is just one client. You've got other prospects in the pipeline. Other opportunities. He laughed, bitter and harsh. That's easy for you to say. You were born into this. You don't know what it's like to actually have to prove yourself. To work for something instead of having it handed to you on a silver platter. I bit my tongue. Swallowed the defense I wanted to give. That I'd worked my ass off at Spelman and Harvard. That I'd spent the last 15 years proving I deserved my position. That being born into money didn't mean the work was easy. But defending myself would only make things worse. It always did. You do work hard, I said instead. Everyone at the company knows how dedicated you are. Dedicated. He downed his second bourbon, poured a third. Is that what they say? Or do they say I'm the former football player who married the boss's daughter and got a corner office as a wedding present? Jahmir was watching now, both earbuds out, his homework forgotten. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists on top of his textbook. Please, baby, I thought. Please don't say anything. Please just let this play out. But I knew he wouldn't. Not anymore. Not my 15-year-old son who'd grown 6 inches in the last year and started looking at his father with something that wasn't quite fear anymore. Something harder. Something dangerous. I turned back to the stove, focused on finishing dinner, trying to ignore the electricity crackling through that kitchen. Come eat. I made your favorite, pan-seared salmon with. I know what you made. I can see it. He walked over to the table, looked down at the plate I'd spent an hour perfecting, picked up his fork, cut into the salmon, took a bite, and I watched his expression shift into something cold and cruel. It's cold. My heart sank. Here we go. It's not cold, baby. I just took it off the stove. It's. Don't tell me what temperature my food is, Kamari. I'm the one eating it. It's cold. He took another bite, his jaw working mechanically. And you put too much garlic in the potatoes again. How many times do I have to tell you I don't like it when you over-season everything? The food wasn't cold. The potatoes had the exact amount of garlic he'd always liked. But that didn't matter. The food was never the point. The point was his need to find fault, to exert control, to remind me that even in my own kitchen in my own house, he had the power to make me feel small. I'm sorry, I said, my voice steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. I can make you something else. It'll just take a few minutes. I don't want something else. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. I want my wife to know how to cook a simple goddamn meal without ruining it. I want to come home after getting embarrassed in front of my former teammate, in front of the whole Houston business community, and not have to deal with incompetence in my own house. Dad! Jahmir's voice cut through the tension. The food is fine. I'm eating the same thing and it's good. Mom worked hard on this dinner. You don't need to. Sit down, Jahmir. Darius turned to our son, his eyes narrowing. This conversation doesn't concern you. It does if you're going to disrespect Mom. The air in that kitchen got so thick I could barely breathe. Darius stared at our son like he was seeing him for the first time. Really seeing him. Seeing that Jahmir wasn't the little boy who used to cry in his room anymore. He was 6'2", 185 pounds of teenage muscle from hours in the gym and on the basketball court. He was almost as tall as his father now, almost as broad in the shoulders, almost as dangerous. What did you just say to me? Darius's voice was deadly quiet. I stepped between them, my hands up in a placating gesture. Jahmir, it's okay. Your father and I are just talking. Why don't you go upstairs and check on Zane? Make sure he's doing his homework. No. My son looked at me with those eyes that were so much like mine, filled with 15 years of helpless watching and growing rage. I'm not leaving, Mom. Jahmir, please. You think you're a man now? Darius interrupted, taking a step toward our son. You think you get to tell me how to talk to my wife in my own house? It's not your house, Jahmir said quietly, but with steel underneath. It's Mom's house. It's her family's house. Her great-grandfather built the company that pays for everything here. You just live in it. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. I saw Darius's face go dark, saw his hands curl into fists, saw 17 years of resentment and wounded pride crystallize into pure rage. Jahmir, go upstairs right now, I said, my voice sharp with fear. Not fear for myself, I'd learned to manage that. Fear for my son, for what might happen if this confrontation continued. Please, baby. Just go. But he didn't move. He just stood there, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, staring at his father with a challenge in his eyes that I'd never seen before. That's when my phone rang. The sound cut through the tension, a cheerful ringtone that was completely inappropriate for the moment. I glanced at the screen. My lawyer's office. Calling about the will update I'd scheduled for next week. Routine business I handled every few years to ensure the succession plan was current. I let it go to voicemail. But the damage was done. Your lawyer. Darius's voice was too calm, too controlled. Why is your lawyer calling you at dinner time? It's nothing. Just routine paperwork about. My phone buzzed with a text message. I saw Darius's eyes flick to the screen, saw him read the preview. Reminder. Will update appointment scheduled for Tuesday, December 10th at 2 p.m. Please review the attached documents before our meeting. The temperature in that kitchen dropped 20 degrees. You're updating your will. It wasn't a question. You're updating your will, and you didn't think to mention it to me? Darius, it's routine. I do this every few years to keep everything current with a business succession plan. It doesn't mean routine. He laughed, a sound with no humor in it whatsoever. You're updating your will the same week I lose the biggest deal of my career. After I've spent 17 years building up your family's company. After everything I've sacrificed to be here. And you want me to believe that's just routine? It is routine. This has nothing to do with. You're trying to cut me out. He took a step toward me, his voice rising. That's what this is about. You're planning your exit strategy. You're going to leave me with nothing after I gave up everything for you. That's not true. I'm not trying to. Don't lie to me, Kamari. His voice exploded, bouncing off the marble floors and custom cabinets. I'm not stupid. I know what this is. You think you can just push me aside. After I gave up football for you. After I gave up my entire identity to become your husband. After I spent 17 years living in your shadow, working at your company, being treated like your trophy husband by everyone who matters. Jahmir stood up, his chair scraping back. Don't yell at her. Sit down, son. This is between me and your mother. No. Jahmir's voice was shaking but firm. I'm not sitting down. I'm not going anywhere. And you're not going to yell at her like that. I could feel the situation spiraling out of control. Could see it in Darius's eyes, the way they were darting between me and our son, calculating, deciding how far he could push this. Could feel it in the air, that electric charge that always preceded violence. Jahmir, please, I begged. Just go upstairs. Please, baby. But my son had made his decision. After 15 years of watching, of feeling helpless, of being too small to intervene, he'd finally reached his breaking point. And he wasn't backing down. I'm 15 years old, Jahmir said, his voice cracking between boy and man. I've spent my entire life watching you treat mom like this. Watching you yell at her, put her down, make her feel small. I've spent 15 years being told to go to my room, to stay out of grown folks' business, to pretend I don't see what's happening in my own house. I'm done pretending. You're done. Darius's voice was dangerous now. You're done. Let me tell you something, son. You don't get to be done. You don't get to tell me how to handle my marriage. You're a child. You don't understand the first thing about what it takes to maintain a relationship, to deal with a strong-willed woman, to be a man in a family like this. A strong-willed woman. Jahmir's voice rose. Is that what you call it when you... Jahmir, stop. I cut him off before he could finish that sentence, before he could say out loud what we'd all been living with for years. This isn't your fight. Your father and I will work this out. We always do. That's right. Darius's voice was cold now. Your mama and I just need to have a conversation. Adult to adult. Why don't you take your little brother upstairs and let the grown-ups handle grown-up business? I saw movement on the stairs then. My 12-year-old baby, standing there in his pajama pants and his favorite video game t-shirt. His controller clutched in his hands. His eyes huge and terrified. How long had he been standing there? How much had he heard? Zane, sweetie, go back to your room, I called out, trying to keep my voice calm and normal even though my heart was racing and my hands were shaking. Everything's fine. But Zane didn't move. He just stood there frozen on those stairs, and I watched tears start rolling down his cheeks. Silent tears, the kind he'd learned to cry so his father wouldn't notice, so he wouldn't draw attention to himself during these moments. Something in Darius snapped. Maybe it was seeing Zane cry. Maybe it was Jahmir's defiance. Maybe it was 17 years of resentment finally boiling over. Maybe it was the bourbon and the failed deal and the text message about my will all colliding at once. He turned back to me and I saw the shift in his eyes. That moment when my husband disappeared and the monster took over. You know what your problem is, Kamari? His voice was too quiet now, which was always worse than the yelling. You think that money makes you better than me. You think that because you were born into this family, because you have a fancy degree and a trust fund and a last name that opens doors, that somehow makes you superior. I don't think that. I've never thought that. Don't interrupt me. He took a step closer. I'm talking now. You're going to listen. Darius. I said don't interrupt. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm. His fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. For once in your life, you're going to shut up and listen to what I have to say. Jahmir moved toward us. Let her go. Stay out of this, Jahmir. Last warning. Let her go. But Darius wasn't listening to our son anymore. He was focused entirely on me. His grip on my arm tightening. His face twisted with rage and pain and 17 years of wounded pride. I gave up everything for you, he hissed. My career, my identity, my pride. I became the man who married into money, the former athlete living off his wife's trust fund. Do you know what that does to a man? Do you know how it feels to have everyone look at you and know that you didn't earn your place, that you're only there because you put a ring on the right woman's finger? I never wanted you to feel that way. You know I've always. His other hand moved to my hair, twisted it, pulled my head back. The pain was sharp and immediate, familiar after so many years. You're planning to leave me, he said, his face inches from mine. You're updating your will because you're planning your exit. Well, let me make something very clear to you, sweetheart. You're not going anywhere. You're not leaving me. 'Cause if you try, I will destroy you. I will take these boys. I will tell every judge in Texas that you're an unfit mother. I will drag the Beaumont name through so much mud that your precious company will never recover. Do you understand me? Yes, I whispered, because agreeing was easier than fighting. Because I'd learned over 17 years that sometimes submission was the path of least resistance. Good. He released my hair but kept his grip on my arm. Now you're going to call that lawyer back and tell him you've changed your mind about the will update. You're going to. Get your hands off her. Jahmir's voice was something I'd never heard before. Not my gentle, studious son. Not my basketball prodigy who'd rather practice free throws than get into conflicts. This was something primal and raw and terrifying in its intensity. Darius turned toward him and I saw him smile. Smile. Like he was glad this was finally happening. You want to do something about it, son? You think you're big enough now? You think you're man enough? I'm big enough, Jahmir said, and his voice was steady now, cold and certain. I'm man enough. And I'm done watching you hurt her. Jahmir, no, I started, but Darius cut me off. Then come on. He released my arm and turned fully toward our son. Let's see what you've got. Let's see if you're really ready to be the man of this house. This isn't what I want, Jahmir said, but he didn't back down. I don't want to fight you, Dad. I just want you to leave her alone. That's all I've ever wanted. Too late for that. Darius grabbed me again, this time by my blouse, those expensive silk buttons popping as he yanked me toward the hallway that led off the kitchen. Away from the boys. Private violence, always kept private, always conducted in rooms where the neighbors couldn't hear and the security cameras didn't reach. We're going to have a conversation, he said, pulling me along. And you're going to explain to me exactly what you meant by updating your will. And then you're going to call that lawyer and tell him you've changed your mind. And if you don't, well. He laughed, cold and cruel. You know what happens when you don't cooperate. I stumbled, tried to keep up, tried not to fall. Behind me, I heard Jahmir shout something. Heard his footsteps following us. Heard Zayn crying louder now, no longer silent. His sobs echoing through our 15,000-square-foot mansion that was supposed to be a home but had never been anything but a battlefield. Then Darius's fist connected with my face. The world exploded in stars and pain. I felt my legs give out, felt myself falling, felt my head connect with the edge of the marble countertop on the way down. Blood everywhere, hot and sticky, running into my eyes and down my neck and staining my $2,500 blouse beyond repair. I heard Zayn scream like his soul was being ripped apart. Heard my own gasp, choked and wet with blood. Tasted copper on my tongue. Felt my vision going dark at the edges. And then I heard my 15-year-old son roar like an animal. And everything changed forever. Get away from her. Through my blurring vision, through the blood and pain and shock, I saw Jahmir launch himself at his father. Saw 185 pounds of teenage rage and muscle and 15 years of helpless watching collide with Darius's 220-pound frame. They went down together, a tangle of limbs and fury, hitting the kitchen floor hard enough that I felt the impact through the marble beneath me. The sound of fists connecting with flesh. Once. Again and again. You don't touch her. Jahmir's voice was unrecognizable. Full of violence I didn't know my gentle son was capable of. You don't ever touch her again. Darius fought back. Of course he did. He was bigger, older, trained in combat from his football days. But Jahmir was younger, faster, and fueled by something Darius couldn't match. 15 years of watching his mother suffer, 15 years of feeling powerless, 15 years of rage that had finally found its release. I tried to get up, tried to crawl toward them, tried to stop what was happening. Jahmir, stop. Please, baby, stop. But he couldn't hear me. Or he could and he wasn't listening. He was somewhere beyond reason now, beyond fear, beyond everything except the single-minded determination to make his father stop hurting his mother. His fists kept connecting. Darius's face, his chest, his ribs. The sounds were sickening. Flesh on flesh, grunts of pain, the wet smack of blood being drawn. Darius managed to throw Jahmir off, tried to get to his feet. But Jahmir was faster. He tackled his father again, drove him backward, and I heard the sickening crack of Darius's head hitting the marble floor. Time stop. The sound echoed through that kitchen like a gunshot. Darius went limp. Jahmir's fists froze mid-swing, suspended in the air above his father's unconscious body. Blood was pooling beneath Darius's head, spreading across that pristine white marble like spilled wine. Mom! Jahmir's voice was small now, a little boy's voice, terrified and confused. He looked at his hands. His knuckles split open, covered in blood. His father's blood and his own mixed together. Mom, what did I do? I crawled toward them on my hands and knees, my own blood dripping onto the floor, mixing with Darius's. Reached my son, pulled him away from his father's body, wrapped my arms around him even though everything hurt. It's okay, baby. It's okay. You're okay. But it wasn't okay. Darius wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. His head was at an odd angle, blood still spreading beneath him, too much blood. Zayn was still on the stairs, screaming now, not silent anymore. His 12-year-old voice breaking with terror and trauma. Jahmir was shaking in my arms, his whole body trembling, repeating the same words over and over. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to. I just wanted him to stop. I just wanted him to stop. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. But I managed to dial 911, managed to speak when the operator answered, managed to make my voice work even though I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. My husband fell, I heard myself say, mechanical and distant. He's not breathing. He hit his head. There's so much blood. Please send an ambulance. Please hurry. I gave them our address, answered their questions, told them what they needed to know to send help. All while holding my son and staring at my husband's unconscious body and trying to process what had just happened. What my 15-year-old baby had just done. What I had let happen by staying for 17 years. Mom! Jahmir's voice was breaking. Mom, is he dead? Did I kill him? I don't know, baby. I don't know. I should have checked Darius's pulse. Should have started CPR. Should have done something to help the man I'd been married to for 17 years. But I couldn't let go of my son. Couldn't make myself care whether Darius lived or died. Could only hold Jahmir and wait for the sirens and pray that somehow, someway, we'd all survive this night. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. The police arrived in 8. They swarmed our house, these strangers in uniforms flooding into our private nightmare, asking questions I couldn't answer, separating me from my sons, taking statements and photographs and cataloging evidence. They put Darius on a stretcher, his head immobilized, an oxygen mask over his face, 4 lines running into his arms. I caught a glimpse of his face as they wheeled him past, bruised, bloodied, unconscious. Still alive. Somehow still alive. They wanted to take Jahmir. 2 police officers, gentle but firm, explaining that they needed to ask him some questions at the station. My baby boy, blood still on his hands and shirt. His eyes wild with fear and shock. No, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. He's a minor. He's not going anywhere without me. Ma'am, we understand, but this is a serious situation. Your husband has severe injuries. We need to understand what happened here. What happened here is that my husband attacked me, and my son defended me. That's what happened. And if you want to ask my son questions, I'm coming with him, and I want our lawyer present. They agreed to let me ride with Jahmir to the hospital where they'd taken Darius. Zayn went with our housekeeper Maria, who'd been in her quarters when everything happened, and now looked like she might pass out from shock and guilt at not being there. In the ambulance, they made me take a different one because I was still bleeding from where my head had hit the counter. I stared at my reflection in the window. My face was swelling, my eye turning purple, my lips split. Blood in my hair, on my clothes, under my nails. I looked like what I was. A battered woman. Finally visible after 17 years of hiding in plain sight. At the hospital they separated us immediately. Jahmir to a room with police officers. Me to the ER where Amara was working, where my friend took one look at me and started crying before she even touched me. He finally did it, she whispered while cleaning my wounds. He finally hit you hard enough that you couldn't hide it. It's over, I told her. One way or another, it's over. They stitched up my split lip, scanned my head for brain bleeds, took photographs of every bruise, every mark, documented everything for evidence. The nurse was kind, methodical, professional. She'd clearly done this before, treated women like me, women who'd stayed too long and paid the price. Then I was in a waiting room, blood still on my designer blouse, and that's where this story began. Where I started telling you about sitting here wondering if my son had killed his father, if I was about to lose my baby boy to the legal system, if this was finally the end of our nightmare or just the beginning of a new one. A detective approached me an hour later. Detective Morrison, tall and black and maybe 45, with kind eyes that had seen too much. Mrs. Sterling, I need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight. I looked up at him, this stranger who held my son's fate in his hands, and made a decision. The same decision I should have made 17 years ago. The decision to tell the truth, consequences be damned. My husband attacked me, I said clearly. He grabbed me, hit me, was dragging me away from my children. My 15-year-old son defended me. That's what happened. Ma'am, your husband has severe head trauma. He's in a medically induced coma. Your son is a minor who caused serious injuries to an adult. This is a very serious situation. You want to know what's serious? I felt something shift inside me, something that had been compressed for 17 years finally expanding. My husband has been beating me for 17 years. Since I was pregnant with my oldest son. He's put me in the hospital 4 times with injuries I had to lie about. He's threatened to take my children, to destroy my reputation, to ruin my family's business if I ever tried to leave. Tonight, he hit me so hard I hit my head on a marble counter and couldn't get up. My son watched his father attack his mother one too many times, and he did what any person would do. He defended me. Mrs. Sterling. Check my medical records, I interrupted. Call Dr. Amara Washington in this ER. She's documented every injury, every visit, every lie I told to cover up what my husband was doing to me. Talk to our household staff. Talk to anyone who's spent time in our home. They all knew. Everyone knew. And no one said anything because I'm Kamari Beaumont-Sterling. And women like me aren't supposed to be victims of domestic violence. Detective Morrison studied me for a long moment. Why didn't you report this before tonight? Because I was scared, I said simply. Because he threatened to take my children. 'Cause I thought I could handle it. 'Cause I was ashamed. Because I didn't want to admit that having $4 billion didn't protect me from being a statistic. Pick a reason, detective. They're all true. He wrote something in his notebook. I need to talk to your son. He's a minor. I want to be present. That's your right. This way. They'd put Jahmir in a small conference room with a female officer, Officer Chen, who looked barely older than my son. He was sitting in a plastic chair, still wearing his blood-stained clothes. His hands wrapped in gauze where his knuckles had split open. When he saw me, he started crying. Not the silent tears he'd learned to cry over the years. Real sobs, the kind that shake your whole body, the kind that come from somewhere deep and broken inside. I went to him, wrapped my arms around him, held him while he fell apart. I'm sorry, he kept saying. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt him that bad. I just wanted him to stop. I just wanted him to stop hurting you. I know, baby. I know. Is he going to die? Did I kill my dad? I don't know yet. But whatever happens, this isn't your fault. Do you hear me? None of this is your fault. Detective Morrison sat down across from us. Jahmir, I need you to tell me what happened tonight. In your own words. Take your time. My son took a shaky breath and started talking. He told them everything. 15 years of watching his father hit his mother. Being 5 years old and trying to get between them. Being sent to his room and told that men don't interfere in grown folks' business. Growing up in a house where violence was normal, where his mother wore long sleeves in summer and makeup that couldn't quite hide the bruises. Hearing her cry through the walls at night. Feeling helpless and angry and ashamed that he was too small to protect her. Until tonight, when he wasn't small anymore. I saw him punch her, Jahmir said, his voice breaking. I saw her fall and hit the counter. There was so much blood. And he was just standing over her, and I knew. I knew if I didn't do something he was going to kill her. Maybe not tonight, but eventually. I've known that for years. We've all known that. So what did you do? I tackled him. We fought. I hit him. I kept hitting him. I couldn't stop. All I could think about was every time he'd hurt her. Every time I'd been too small to stop him. Every time I'd had to pretend I didn't see or hear what was happening in my own house. Tears were streaming down his face. I didn't want to kill him. I swear I didn't. I just wanted him to stop. That's all I've ever wanted. Is my dad going to die? He asked Detective Morrison. Am I going to jail? The detective's expression softened. Son, we're going to sort this out. Right now, you just focus on being with your mother. There was a commotion in the hallway. Raised voices. The click of expensive heels on linoleum. My mother had arrived. Lorraine Beaumont swept into that conference room like a force of nature. All diamonds and fury and old money power. 68 years old and still commanding every room she entered. Still the matriarch of an empire. Still a woman who'd never let anyone see her vulnerable. What in God's name happened? She demanded, her eyes taking in my battered face, Jahmir's blood-stained clothes, the police officers watching us with careful expressions. How could you let this happen? Do you have any idea what the press will do with this? The board will have questions. Our investors will panic. This is a disaster. Something inside me snapped. He could have killed me tonight, Mama. She stopped mid-rant, stared at me. Your grandson saved my life. Darius was beating me, and Jahmir stopped him. If you can't see that, if all you can think about is the press and the board and the investors, then you need to leave. Kamari, don't be dramatic. This is obviously a terrible situation, but we need to think about how to. How to what? Spin it. Cover it up. Make it go away like you've been making it go away for 17 years. I stood up, and even though I was half her size and beaten to hell, I felt powerful in that moment. You knew, Mama. You knew what he was doing to me, and you told me to stay. You told me marriage takes work. You told me grandmother stayed through worse. You valued the Beaumont name more than you valued your daughter's life. Her face crumbled. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother look truly shaken. I thought you could handle it, she whispered. You're so strong, Kamari. You've always been so strong. I thought. You thought wrong. My voice was steel. This ends tonight. I'm filing for divorce. I'm pressing charges. I'm taking full custody of my boys. And if you have a problem with any of that, then you can take your empire and your reputation and your old money values, and you can leave my life forever. Kamari. I mean it, Mama. Either you support me and your grandsons through this, or you walk away right now. Choose. She stood there for a long moment, this woman who'd never backed down from anything in her life, who'd built an empire through sheer will and ruthless determination. And I watched something shift in her face, something soften and break and maybe become human again. What do you need? She asked quietly. I need you to be my mother. Not the CEO. Not the Beaumont matriarch. Just my mother. She nodded once, sharp and certain. Then she walked over and pulled me into her arms, something she hadn't done since I was a child, and held me while I finally let myself cry. A doctor appeared in the doorway. Young, tired, still wearing his surgical scrubs. Family of Darius Sterling. We all turned. My mother's arms tightened around me. Jahmir's hand found mine, his grip desperate. I'm his wife, I said. Mr. Sterling is in the ICU. He has severe head trauma, multiple facial fractures, and we've had to induce a coma to reduce the swelling in his brain. The next 48 hours are critical. Is he going to survive? I heard myself ask. It's too early to say. Even if he does, there may be permanent damage. Brain injuries like this are unpredictable. Jahmir made a sound like a wounded animal. I felt him start to collapse, caught him, held him up. I didn't want to kill him, my son sobbed. I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted him to stop. What would you do if you were in my position right now? If your child had saved your life but might have destroyed his own in the process? If you'd stayed too long in a nightmare and now everyone you loved was paying the price? Because I'm standing here in this hospital, covered in blood, holding my traumatized son, and I don't have any answers. I just know that 17 years of silence and survival just came to a violent, irreversible end. And nothing will ever be the same again. If you're still with me, if you want to know how this ends, whether Darius survives, whether Jahmir faces charges, whether our family can ever heal from this, hit that subscribe button. Because this story isn't over. The hardest part is just beginning. The doctor's words hung in the air like smoke. Severe head trauma. Induced coma. The next 48 hours are critical. Permanent damage. I watched my 15-year-old son crumble in my arms, watched the weight of what he'd done settle onto his shoulders like a physical thing, crushing him under its enormity. But there was no time to process. No time to grieve or panic or fall apart. Because in the next breath, Detective Morrison was telling us we needed to come down to the station to give formal statements, and a social worker was asking about Zane's welfare, and hospital administrators were hovering with forms about Darius's care, and my mother was on her phone mobilizing lawyers like she was planning a military campaign. The Beaumont family machine was in motion, and I was swept along with it whether I wanted to be or not. They kept us at the police station until 3 in the morning. Jahmir and I in separate rooms, giving our statements over and over, every detail documented, photographed, recorded. Detective Morrison was thorough, professional, but not unkind. He asked the hard questions. Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you report it? Why did you wait 17 years? Without judgment in his voice, just a need to understand. I told him everything. Every incident I could remember. Every hospital visit Amara had documented. Every threat Darius had made about taking the boys. Every reason I'd convinced myself to stay. It poured out of me like poison I'd been holding in for too long. 17 years of secrets and shame and survival finally exposed to the fluorescent lights of a police interrogation room. When I mentioned the security cameras in our house, Detective Morrison's eyebrows went up. You have security footage of the public areas. The foyer, the living rooms, the kitchen. Darius insisted on them after a break-in in the neighborhood 5 years ago. I laughed, bitter. He said they were to protect us. I always wondered if he'd forgotten they might protect me from him too. They sent officers to retrieve the footage that night. Got a warrant, pulled the hard drives, found weeks of recordings that showed patterns anyone looking would have seen. Darius's body language, aggressive and looming. Me flinching, backing away, trying to placate. The boys, especially Jahmir, watching with expressions that went from scared to resigned to hardened as the dates progressed. And they got that night. All of it. Darius grabbing me, hitting me, me falling and hitting the counter. Jahmir tackling his father. The fight. The terrible moment when Darius's head hit the marble floor with that sickening crack. Evidence. Incontrovertible, time-stamped, high-definition evidence of exactly what had happened in that kitchen. The district attorney was called in around midnight. Rachel Chen, 42, reputation for being tough on domestic violence cases. A woman who'd built her career on protecting victims and prosecuting abusers. She watched the footage 3 times, read Amara's medical reports going back 15 years, reviewed the statements, and then asked to speak with me directly. We sat across from each other in a conference room that smelled like bad coffee and institutional cleaning products. She had kind eyes behind her glasses, but her voice was all business. Mrs. Sterling, I've reviewed the evidence in your case. I'm going to be very direct with you about where we are. My heart was pounding. Okay. Your husband is currently in critical condition. If he dies, this becomes a homicide investigation. If he survives, he'll likely be charged with assault, domestic battery, and potentially attempted murder based on the severity of your injuries and the pattern of abuse we're seeing in these records. And my son. She paused, and in that pause I felt my entire world hanging in the balance. My baby boy, 15 years old, who should be worrying about basketball tryouts and calculus tests, not whether he'd spend his life in prison for saving his mother. Your son was defending you from a clear and immediate threat, she said slowly. The video shows your husband attacking you, shows you falling and sustaining a serious head injury, shows your son intervening only after you were incapacitated and in danger. The use of force, while extreme, was proportional to the threat. Multiple witnesses, including your younger son and household staff we've already interviewed, corroborate years of abuse and recent escalation. So what does that mean? It means I'm not charging him. This is textbook defense of another. Specifically, a minor child protecting his parent from grievous bodily harm or death. No jury in Texas would convict him, and frankly, I don't believe pursuing charges would serve justice. I started crying. Not pretty tears. Ugly, gasping sobs of relief that shook my whole body. Jahmir wasn't going to jail. My son wasn't going to pay for my failures with his freedom. However, Rachel continued, her voice gentle now, I want to be clear about something. Your son is going to need help. Serious therapeutic intervention. What he experienced tonight, what he's experienced for 15 years, that's severe trauma. And the act of violence itself, even in self-defense, even justified, that will stay with him. You need to get him into counseling immediately. Both your boys, actually. I will. I promise. Good. She slid a business card across the table. This is a therapist who specializes in trauma in children who've witnessed domestic violence. I want you to call her first thing tomorrow. Not next week. Tomorrow. I took the card, held it like a lifeline. What about Darius? If he survives. If he survives, I'll be pursuing charges. And I'll be recommending a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with you or your children. The evidence is overwhelming, Mrs. Sterling. He won't be able to touch you again. He'll fight it. He has resources, connections, lawyers. So do you, she interrupted. And unlike him, you have the truth and the evidence on your side. Let him fight. He'll lose. They released us around 4 a.m. My mother had arranged for a suite at the Four Seasons. Neutral territory. Somewhere that wasn't our house with its blood-stained kitchen and 17 years of bad memories. She'd also collected Zane from our housekeeper and had him waiting there with a child psychologist she'd somehow found in the middle of the night. Money does have its advantages. Not enough to prevent abuse, apparently, but enough to mobilize an army of professionals when the walls finally came down. Jahmir fell asleep in the car, his head on my shoulder, exhausted from adrenaline crash and emotional devastation. He looked so young in sleep, so vulnerable. Hard to believe this was the same person who'd beaten his father unconscious just hours earlier. Hard to reconcile my gentle, studious son with the violence he'd been capable of when pushed to his breaking point. At the hotel, I put him to bed in one of the suite's bedrooms, pulled the covers up to his chin like I used to do when he was little. His knuckles were still bandaged, his face still tear-stained. But he was safe. He was free. He was mine, and nobody was taking him away. Zane was in the living room with a psychologist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Reynolds who specialized in childhood trauma. She was talking to him quietly, asking gentle questions, letting him play with some kind of therapeutic toy while he processed what he'd witnessed. When he saw me, Zane jumped up and ran to me, wrapped his 12-year-old arms around my waist and held on like he'd never let go. "Is Jahmir okay?" he asked into my shirt. "Is he going to jail?" "No, baby. Jahmir's not going to jail. He's going to be okay. We're all going to be okay. Is Dad going to die?" I knelt down so I could look him in the eyes. My youngest son, who'd spent his entire life trying to be invisible, trying not to draw attention during the explosions, trying to disappear into video games and books where the world made sense. "I don't know, sweetheart. Dad's very hurt. But whatever happens, you and Jahmir and we're going to be okay. We're safe now. Do you understand? We're safe. Is it really over?" His voice was so small, so full of hope and fear mixed together. "You're not going back to him. It's over. We're never going back. Promise you, baby. It's over. We're free." He started crying then, these deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from his toes. All the fear and trauma and confusion of 12 years of living in a war zone finally pouring out. I held him and let him cry, let him release everything he'd been holding in, let him be a child who was allowed to feel his feelings instead of a small soldier who had to stay quiet and invisible to survive. My mother stood in the corner of that hotel suite, watching us with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Grief, maybe. Guilt. Recognition of her own failures. For the first time in my life, Lorraine Beaumont looked old. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Kamari, I'm so sorry. You were right. I chose the empire over my daughter. I chose reputation over your safety. I thought." Her voice broke. "I thought you were strong enough to handle it. I thought that's what strong women do, they endure. That's what my mother taught me, what her mother taught her. But I was wrong. I should have helped you leave. I should have protected you and my grandsons. I failed you." It was the first time I'd ever heard my mother admit to being wrong about anything. "Yes," I said simply. "You did fail us. But you're here now. That has to count for something." She nodded, wiped her eyes in a gesture so Unesh-like it was almost shocking. What do you need? Whatever it is, whatever you want, it's yours. I need you to support my decisions. All of them. No questioning, no trying to manage the optics, no putting the company first. Can you do that? Yes. I'm filing for divorce. Tomorrow morning. First thing. Good. I'm taking full control of Beaumont Oil. The title that should have been mine years ago. Darius is out. Not just from the company, from our lives entirely. I'll have the board papers drawn up by noon. I'm selling the River Oaks house. I never want to set foot in that place again. I'll call the realtor. And I'm going to start a foundation for domestic violence survivors. I'm going to use my name, my story, my money to help women who are trapped the way I was. Especially wealthy women, successful women. Women who think they can't be victims because they have money and education and power. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's brilliant. And it's exactly what your father would have wanted. He always said the Beaumont fortune was meant to do good in the world, not just accumulate. I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. Will you help me? Not run it, not control it, but help me. You know people, you have connections, you understand how to build institutions that last. I'd be honored. The sun was coming up over Houston. I could see it through the floor-to-ceiling windows of that hotel suite, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. New day. Literally and metaphorically. The first day of the rest of our lives. Dr. Reynolds left around 6 a.m. with appointments scheduled for both boys. Jahmir twice a week, Zayn once a week, family therapy for all three of us once a week. She gave me a thick folder of resources, support groups, books about helping children heal from trauma. She was kind and professional and didn't judge me for staying so long or leaving so late. Your children are resilient, she told me at the door. They've survived something horrific, but they can heal. So can you. It's going to take time and work, but you can build a new normal. A healthy normal. Thank you, I whispered, because what else could I say to a stranger who was offering hope when I'd been living without it for so long? I ordered room service for breakfast even though none of us were hungry. Made the boys eat anyway because they needed to keep their strength up, needed the routine, needed the normalcy of something as simple as eggs and toast and orange juice. Jahmir came out of his bedroom around 7, looking like he hadn't slept at all even though I'd watched him pass out from exhaustion. He sat down at the table and stared at his plate like he didn't recognize food. Mom! His voice was hoarse. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't big enough to stop him sooner. My heart shattered all over again. Baby, look at me. I waited until his eyes met mine. You were never supposed to stop him. Never. That was never your job. You were a child. You are a child. I was supposed to protect you and I failed. I failed you every single day for 15 years by staying with a man who hurt me and traumatized you. That's on me. Not on you. Do you understand? But if I'd been bigger, if I'd been stronger, if you'd been bigger, he might have hurt you too. Or worse. Jahmir, you did nothing wrong. Not 15 years ago when you were too small, and not last night when you were big enough. You saved my life. You protected your mother when I couldn't protect myself. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to do that again. I keep seeing his head hit the floor, Jahmir whispered. I keep hearing that sound. What if he dies, Mom? What if I killed him? Then he dies. And that's tragic and complicated and going to be hard to process. But it doesn't change the fact that you did what you had to do to save me. If your father dies, that's a consequence of his own choices. 17 years of choices to hurt instead of love, to control instead of cherish, to destroy instead of build. You didn't put him in that ICU, baby. He put himself there. Zayn spoke up then, his voice quiet but steady. I'm glad you did it, Jahmir. I'm glad you stopped him. I was too scared to do anything. I just stood there and watched. But you saved Mom. You saved all of us. Jahmir looked at his little brother and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Shared trauma. The bond of two children who'd survived something no child should have to survive. We're going to be okay, I told them both. It's going to be hard and it's going to take time, but we're going to be okay. No more walking on eggshells. No more hiding. No more pretending everything's fine when it's not. We're going to heal, and we're going to do it together. I filed for divorce at 9 a.m. the next morning. My lawyer, Maxwell Harrison, had been on retainer for years handling business matters. Now I was asking him to dismantle my marriage with the same efficiency he'd used to dissolve a bad corporate partnership. I want full custody, I told him in his downtown office. I want the house sold and the proceeds put in trust for the boys. I want every asset that's mine by inheritance or trust separated from any marital property. And I want a restraining order that prohibits Darius from coming within 500 feet of me or our children. What about spousal support? He'll likely ask for it, given that he was financially dependent on you. Thought about that. Thought about Darius in that ICU bed, possibly dying, possibly waking up with brain damage, possibly recovering fully and trying to come back into our lives. Thought about 17 years of him using my money while using his fists on my body. Nothing, I said. Not a penny. He can get a job like everyone else. Or he can live off whatever settlement he gets from his NFL injury. But he doesn't get another dollar from me or my family. Maxwell nodded. I'll draw up the papers. Given the circumstances, the abuse, the criminal charges he's likely to face, I don't anticipate significant resistance. But be prepared for him to fight. Men like him don't give up power easily. Let him fight. I'm done being afraid. That afternoon, my mother convened an emergency board meeting at Beaumont Oil. I walked into that boardroom for the first time in my life not as Esh Beaumont's daughter or Darius Sterling's wife, but as Kamari Eloise Beaumont-Sterling, majority shareholder and incoming CEO. There were 12 men on that board, old money Texas oil barons who'd known my great-grandfather and worked with my father, and tolerated my mother because she'd proven herself more ruthless than any of them. They looked at me with my bruised face and swollen eye and split lip, and I saw the calculations happening behind their eyes. Gentlemen, my mother said, standing at the head of the conference table like she'd done for 40 years, I'm stepping down as CEO effective immediately. My daughter Kamari will be taking over as Chief Executive Officer and Chair of the Board. I will remain as an advisor, but operational control passes to her. Silence. Esh, is this really the time? This is exactly the time, I interrupted, my voice clear and strong. I have a Harvard MBA, 15 years of experience in this company, and a vision for where we need to go in the next decade. I also have a very public scandal that I'm not going to hide from or apologize for. My husband abused me for 17 years, and last night my son defended me. That's the truth. It's going to be in every newspaper and on every gossip site. And I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. The optics. The optics are that Beaumont Oil is now run by a domestic violence survivor who's using her platform and her wealth to make a difference. We're establishing the Beaumont Foundation for Family Safety, endowed with $500 million, dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence escape dangerous situations regardless of their economic status. We're also implementing new HR policies company-wide. Mandatory training on recognizing and reporting domestic violence, paid leave for employees dealing with abuse situations, and partnerships with shelters and legal aid organizations. I let that sink in. Watched their faces shift from skepticism to calculation to reluctant respect. We're going to lead on this issue, I continued. Not because it's good PR, though it will be, but because it's the right thing to do. Because I should have had resources and support to leave years ago. And I didn't because I was ashamed and scared. And if I, with all my money and education and power, couldn't find a way out, how much harder is it for women with nothing? One of the older board members, Robert Matthews, who'd known my father, cleared his throat. Your father would be proud of you, Kamari. Taking something terrible and turning it into something meaningful. That's the Beaumont way. The vote was unanimous. 13-0. I was now the CEO of a $4 billion oil company, and I'd gotten there not despite my abuse, but because I'd finally found the courage to speak about it. We moved into a new house 3 weeks later. Nothing like the River Oaks mansion. This was a normal house in a gated community, 5 bedrooms, a pool, a basketball hoop in the driveway. The kind of house where you could be a family instead of maintaining an image. Where the boys could have friends over without worrying about what they might see or hear. Where I could walk around in sweatpants and no makeup and not feel like I was failing some impossible standard. Jahmir got his own room, painted it blue, put up posters of his favorite basketball players. Started seeing Dr. Reynolds twice a week like clockwork, talking through his trauma, learning that he wasn't responsible for his parents' marriage or his father's choices. He was quieter than before, more serious, but I could see him slowly coming back to himself. He made varsity basketball that season, had his best year yet, but he played differently now. Less angry, more focused, like he'd burned out something toxic and was building himself back cleaner. Zayn got his own room too, filled it with video game posters and books and finally started talking more. Dr. Reynolds said he was making excellent progress, that getting him out of that toxic environment was the best thing we could have done. He made friends at his new school, joined the chess club, started smiling again. Real smiles, not the careful, anxious ones he'd worn in the old house. And me. I threw myself into work and healing in equal measure. Took over Beaumont Oil and started implementing changes that would have been impossible under my mother's regime. Environmental initiatives, community investment, transparent governance. The board grumbled but the stock price went up, so they learned to live with my leadership style. The Beaumont Foundation for Family Safety launched 6 months after that terrible night. We'd partnered with shelters across Texas, established a legal fund to help victims get restraining orders and file charges, created a public awareness campaign about abuse in wealthy communities. I did interviews, carefully with my therapist's guidance, about my own experience. Not for sympathy, but to show other women that it could happen to anyone. That money didn't protect you. That education didn't protect you. That the only thing that protected you was having the courage to leave. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of women reached out. CEOs, doctors, lawyers, professors, all with stories like mine. All trapped by shame and fear and the belief that they should be able to handle it because they were strong, successful women. We helped every single one we could. Darius woke up from his coma after 3 weeks. Severe brain damage, they said. Would need years of rehabilitation. Might never fully recover his cognitive function or motor control. The doctors said he'd live but would never be the man he was before. I didn't visit him in the hospital. Didn't send flowers or cards or well wishes. The DA's office kept me updated on his condition because they needed to know if they were prosecuting an assault case or a homicide. When he was stable enough, they charged him with aggravated domestic assault, multiple counts spanning 15 years. The security footage, the medical records, the testimony from our household staff who'd finally felt safe enough to speak. It was damning. His lawyers tried to negotiate a plea deal. Probation, counseling, community service. The DA refused. Rachel Chen wanted jail time. Wanted this case to send a message that domestic violence had consequences regardless of who you were or how charming you seemed in public. It went to trial 8 months after that night in our kitchen. I had to testify. Had to sit in that courtroom and tell our story to a jury of strangers. Had to look at Darius in his wheelchair. His speech slurred from the brain damage. His eyes empty of the charm that had once captivated me. I felt nothing looking at him. No love, no hate, no anger, no satisfaction. Just nothing. He was a stranger. Cautionary tale. A chapter of my life that was finally, mercifully closed. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison, eligible for parole after 8. He'd serve his time in a special facility that could handle his medical needs, his rehabilitation, his diminished capacity. When the verdict was read, I didn't cry or cheer or feel vindicated. I just felt tired. Tired of carrying this weight, tired of thinking about him, tired of letting him take up space in my head and my heart. Jahmir was in the courtroom for the verdict. 17 years old now, 6'3", preparing for his senior year and the college recruitment that was already heating up. When they led Darius away in handcuffs, when they wheeled him past us in that orange jumpsuit looking nothing like the man who'd terrorized our family, Jahmir reached over and took my hand. "Is it really over now?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, baby. It's really over." "I don't feel anything," he admitted. "I thought I'd feel something, relief or guilt or sadness. But I just feel empty." "That's okay. That's normal. He can't hurt us anymore. That's all that matters." We walked out of that courthouse together, my 2 boys flanking me, my mother behind us, into the Houston sunshine and the rest of our lives. People ask me sometimes if I blame Jahmir for what he did that night. If I wish he hadn't intervened. If I think he went too far. I tell them the truth. I blame myself for taking 17 years to save us. My son just finished what I should have started years ago. Does that make me a bad mother? Maybe. I let my children grow up in a house where violence was normal. I let them witness things no child should see. I chose my fear and my pride and my family legacy over their safety and innocence. Or maybe it makes me human. Flawed and scared and doing the best I could with what I had. Surviving in a situation that millions of women survive every day. Making impossible choices between bad options and worse ones. All I know for certain is that we're free now. Free from the fear, free from the walking on eggshells, free from the cycles of violence and apology and false peace. We're building a new life, a healthy life. A life where love doesn't come with fists attached and home is a sanctuary instead of a battlefield. Jahmir just got accepted to Duke on a full basketball scholarship. He's going to study psychology, says he wants to work with kids who've experienced trauma. My baby boy, who witnessed and experienced so much pain, is going to spend his life helping others heal. That's not the outcome of violence. That's the outcome of resilience. Zayn is thriving in high school, made honor roll last semester, is talking about maybe becoming a game designer. He's still quieter than other kids his age, still carries some of that trauma, but he's laughing more, opening up more, letting himself be a teenager instead of a survivor. And me. I'm 44 years old, CEO of a billion-dollar company, founder of a foundation that's helped thousands of women escape situations like mine. I'm dating again. Carefully, slowly, with a therapist's guidance and firm boundaries. Learning what healthy love looks like. Learning that I deserve to be cherished, not controlled. The lesson I've learned, the one I want every person watching this to understand, is that abuse doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you have a Harvard MBA or a high school diploma. It doesn't care if you live in a mansion or a trailer. It doesn't care if you're black or white, rich or poor, famous or unknown. Abuse is about power and control, and it can happen to anyone. But here's the other side of that lesson. Leaving is possible. Healing is possible. Building a new life is possible. Takes courage and support and resources. And yes, having money makes some of it easier. But the core requirement isn't wealth. It's the decision to stop accepting unacceptable behavior. The decision to believe you deserve better. The decision to save yourself and your children no matter what it costs. I wasted 17 years believing I was trapped. Believing that leaving would cost me more than staying. Believing that I was somehow responsible for managing my husband's rage, for preventing his violence, for maintaining our perfect image. I was wrong about all of it. The only person responsible for Darius's violence was Darius. The only person who could have stopped it years earlier was me. And the cost of staying, my children's innocence, my own dignity, nearly my life, was infinitely higher than any cost of leaving could have been. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, if you're living in fear of someone who claims to love you, if you're making excuses for behavior that no one should have to excuse, please hear me. You deserve better. Your children deserve better. And there is help available, resources, people who will believe you and support you. The Beaumont Foundation has a website with a national hotline that's staffed 24/7. We have legal resources, shelter partnerships, financial assistance programs. We help women from all economic backgrounds escape dangerous situations and build new lives. You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to be as strong as you think you need to be. You just have to take the first step. My son shouldn't have had to save my life. That's the truth of it. A 15-year-old boy shouldn't have had to use violence to protect his mother because his mother was too scared or proud or trapped to protect herself. But I'm grateful. God, I'm so grateful that he was there. That he was big enough and brave enough and loved me enough to do what I couldn't do for myself. That night changed all of us. Broke us in some ways, freed us in others. We're not the same people we were before. We're scarred and healing and learning how to be a family without fear as the foundation. And you know what? We're better. Not despite what happened, but because we finally faced it, dealt with it, survived it, and came out the other side. 2 years later, I'm standing in the office that used to be my mother's, looking out over Houston, and I can breathe. Really breathe, without that constant weight on my chest, without calculating someone else's mood, without fear. The Beaumont Foundation just opened its 10th shelter. Jahmir is thriving at Duke, calling home twice a week to tell me about his classes and his games and his life. Zayn is applying to colleges, excited about his future instead of haunted by his past. And me, I'm free. Finally, completely, irreversibly free. They ask me if it was worth it. The scandal, the publicity, the exposure of our family's darkest secrets to the world. They ask if I regret not leaving sooner, not protecting my children from witnessing what they witnessed. Yes and no. I regret the years we lost. I regret the trauma my boys carry. I regret not being brave enough sooner. But I don't regret where we are now. I don't regret using my story to help others. I don't regret the foundation or the advocacy or the public acknowledgement that domestic violence exists in penthouses and mansions just like it exists everywhere else. Most of all, I don't regret that my sons know now what real strength looks like. Not staying in an impossible situation out of pride or fear, but having the courage to leave. To choose safety over status. To choose life over legacy. We're finally free. And freedom, it turns out, is worth everything. If this story resonated with you, if you stayed with me through this entire journey, if you believe that abuse survivors deserve support and resources regardless of their circumstances, please hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Start conversations about domestic violence that go beyond stereotypes and recognize that it truly can happen to anyone. And if you're living in an abusive situation right now, please reach out. To the Beaumont Foundation, to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, to a friend or family member or anyone who will listen. Your life is worth saving. Your children's innocence is worth protecting. And you deserve to be free. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for bearing witness. Thank you for understanding that sometimes survival looks messy and complicated and nothing like the fairy tales we're told about love and marriage and family. We're finally free. And that's everything.